Finding out you're being kicked from your team or refusing to attend a tournament because of others are bound to stir up arguments. These are 10 of the biggest controversies in Rocket League history. This offseason, we witnessed a player unexpectedly leave what was easily one of the greatest teams in the world right now. After Moist Esports, consisting of Rise, Joyo, and Vatira, had one of the biggest growth stories we've seen in pro play, going from poor results in their debut split representing Team Queso to winning 2 regionals and finishing second at their first ever major. They were later signed by famous content creator Moist Critical's organization, Moist Esports, bringing them a strong fan base and a generous no-touch earnings contract deal, setting them up for a bright future. Moist continued the success by winning the spring major, and with first place finishes in their last 2 RLCS tournaments, they were looking like strong favorites going into the World Championships. Here they advanced to top 8 to play Furia in what easily could have been described as the greatest series of all time.
Back into the midfield. Oh! That's not awkward though. Kyle bumps it off. Now comes the follow. And into the back of the net. Moist did not let this drop earlier on. Now they're up against it. Furia! You're going for the ball. Kyle shut it down. And Furia wins.
This was still Moist's first RLCS season together, and they easily had what it takes to be a world champion roster next year. But Vatira had other plans and announced his departure from the team seemingly out of nowhere even after all their success. He cited reasons for leaving the team being he felt like he didn't belong in the team's atmosphere outside of them winning, with the language barrier potentially playing a factor in this, as well as a claim that created controversy being his teammates would troll in scrims.
No, that's wrong. That is 100% wrong. I just don't like the way it perceives me and Joyo.
This stirred up the community, with players pointing out that a 16-year-old just shouldn't be making these decisions and that Vatira was taking winning for granted, while others said that it was the player's decision and didn't involve anyone else. Now with Vatira speculated to join the French org Carmine Corp with Exotic and Itachi, and Moist fielding Astral as his replacement, many say that this could backfire on Vatira and truly be a major downgrade for both teams. While we're on the topic of Moist, they were also in the center of a heated political discussion following the announcement of a $2 million Rocket League LAN. This tournament was Gamers 8, located in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. The tournament had both open qualifiers and invited teams, with Moist Esports being one of them. They originally accepted the offer to play, but would end up withdrawing from the tournament along with a controversial tweet from Moist's coach, Noah. "I will not be associating with a country that does not recognize LGBTQ+ people as human beings." This sparked some backlash from the Middle East community, with concerns that Moist were being insulting by withdrawing from the tournament after accepting the invite. Points were made that these Middle Eastern players attended events in their countries and respected all the rules that came along with that, yet it wasn't being done in return for them, while others would say that it wasn't the same because their rules break basic human rights. Claims were made that this event was a form of sport washing, which is a term used to criticize a country using an event to direct attention away from a poor reputation in a certain aspect. There is a history of this happening in traditional sports and can easily apply the same way to esports. Moist left the question if it was the right move to miss out on this opportunity and prizing for their careers, but Noah decided that morals were still to be put above all of that. The event ended up having other issues as well, with poor promotion leaving viewership very low for the amount of prizing, and numerous teams not showing due to things like strict recent date vaccinations, and another player not being able to enter the country since he was a part of the US military. Overall, it just left for a touchy subject for the scene moving forward, and one of the biggest controversies we've seen in the entirety of the esport. Now, we've all had our moments of trash talk in gaming, especially during heated rank sessions, but Calm from version 1 took that to a whole nother level at recent RLCS LANs. We did cover this on the channel before, when Calm received backlash for showing ruthless trash talk towards his opponents at the Winter Major, with him later saying it was to get into his opponents' heads and receive no repercussions for it. But this wasn't the last time we would see this happen from Calm, as he would continue this behavior in the Spring Major, but just a little worse. Calm's playstyle couldn't have fit this behavior any better, with him being a disruptor and an aggressive demo-heavy player, though he did get a warning this time around for excessive profanity. The tournament admins were okay with him screaming and all the banter, but the excessive language, not so much. Once version 1 had qualified for the crowd day, this carried over to the main stage, where you can imagine with Calm's playstyle and behavior, the Americans' villain act was in full effect among this European crowd.
I don't think they're quite loud enough, to be honest.
While the other players on V1 would receive cheering, every time Calm would score, he would be rained on with booing. V1 eventually lost to Moist, but what caused some controversy was that even when the series was done and over with, the crowd would continue the booing. Some thought that kicking him when he was down after the tournament run was done and over with was taking the situation a bit too far, since it was all in good fun and even Calm enjoyed playing the part. Not everyone agreed with this though, and said that it was fair and just comes along with playing the part of the villain. In esports, teams make changes and players get replaced often. It's all a part of the game, and kicking players players is something that's never easy, but can be done in a proper way with dignity and respect for your teammate. Yet in this case, it didn't go down quite that smoothly. Daniel and Arsenal from Space Station Gaming were ready to make a change, and Reddles was in the firing range. SSG had plans of replacing him after the World Championships, and Arsenal had told other players about this while Reddles didn't know anything about it. He eventually found out before playing a series from another player rather than his teammates. When the community became aware of this, they mutually agreed that Reddles deserved the respect of being told about the replacement, considering how long he's been a part of the team. People were upset that his teammates went behind his back, and I'm sure you can imagine how something like this could affect the series. And in hindsight, we could definitely see something may have been going on.
There was nothing that had to do with Reddles. I missed fist bumps with Dan before. People have pointed it out. It wasn't my place to say anything to anyone about our team. I regret handling it how I did.
What could be worse than being kicked from your team without warning? Probably not being paid by your team in the first place. And believe it or not, this has happened multiple times in the esport. One instance was in the earlier days of the RLRS with an organization called Fibion. They were infamous for not paying players and blowing them off for making excuses when they were confronted, as well as ruining a great opportunity for their players when evil geniuses would offer a generous contract buyout, but Fibion would ask for an unreasonable amount, being double, and tank the deal in hopes that their players would just re-sign with them. Even to this day, there has been controversy around some organizations, more recently being the notorious Prestige Esports. The team's coach released a statement and, among other things, mentioned that he wasn't being paid other than the first month. After messaging the owner, he was left with the same thing as Fibion, being blown off and promised a 5 to 10% late fee to keep him waiting. The players were also missing payments, with one of their starters, Jay, being owed $8,000 to this day. He was paid for the first 5 to 6 months, so he had trust, but Prestige ended up scamming people due to the fact they had run out of money. The organization was shut down and the owner deleted his socials. You can say what you want about gaming being a real job, but not being paid salary on a contracted agreement is insane. It truly puts players in a tough position, considering they would have to pursue legal action, which of course takes hefty legal fees. This leaves room for certain organizations to take advantage of players, like we've seen countless times, not just in this esport, but others as well. We've all seen technical issues in esports. It's just bound to happen, but rarely does a match outcome get heavily affected because of it. But at the World Championships, in a series of FaZe versus the Club, we saw this happen. The Club were heavy underdogs in this matchup, but it actually started out in their favor with a clean 2-0 start to the series. FaZe would then win Game 3 and take the lead in Game 4. The Club would retaliate when Sipkle would mess up his kickoff, strangely not using any boost. But there was an admin pause for this, and turns out Sipkle was having a technical issue causing his controller to not register his boost inputs. After a grueling 20-minute pause, it was ruled as no fault of Sipkle's own, and the goal was taken back, restarting the game from that kickoff. In this situation, you have to realize every goal is huge for an underdog team, so losing even one is a big deal. Then in Game 5, FaZe scored first, and the Club tied it, sending the game into overtime. This is where the Club scored yet another kickoff goal, this time to win the game. Well, that's what many thought until realizing the same thing happened to Sipkle again and another pause was put into effect. While it was a less lengthy pause this time, it was still a very big deal considering the goal was revoked again and the game was restarted from overtime. To make matters worse, FaZe went on to win this game after the Club had already celebrated winning that exact match. Not only did this put FaZe into series point, but there's no denying this would have crushed the Club's team morale. FaZe would end up winning the next match and series, which caused controversy for the Club fans. One, because of the technical issues, but also because such a crucial game was restarted from overtime rather than just the full 5 minutes. Some went as far to say it was still done intentionally, though it is something to note that Sipkle is a player who's had this issue happen before online, notably back on SSG when they would lose because of a disconnect on kickoff. On top of that, Sipkle is also the only pro we know that takes apart his controllers, and somehow this could play a factor with all his recurrent controller issues. So I wouldn't say he's doing anything on purpose, but if this does happen again to him specifically, his controller hardware might be something to look further into. The minimum age to compete in the RLCS is 15, and for young prodigies they can't wait to turn 15 to play, but in a few instances like with Atomic, they've taken can't wait a little too seriously. When we see young players that aren't so patient and choose to play anyways, typically on someone else's account, they tend to get caught and banned for 1 full year.
He played in someone else's account when he was 14 to help them to qualify for RLCS, so literally the same thing. He was banned from the day of his 15th birthday until the day of his 16th birthday, which has not yet happened.
So this wasn't anything new for French prodigy Zen, who's a strong mechanical player compared to the likes of Daniel and Aqua, who was highly anticipated to compete in the RLCS. But like others, Zen was caught competing on another player's account in RLCS X with Gaspo and Seiko. Everyone on the roster received the standard 1-year ban, but the controversy is that Zen wasn't really given the same heads up. With him being underage, the ban statement wasn't released right away and made many people think that Zen was being let off, possibly because he was only 13 when he played. And with his 15-year-old birthday approaching, plenty expected Zen to be competing in the upcoming split. But after he was signed to a player agency, they received an email informing them that Zen would be facing a 1-year ban starting on his 15th birthday. In the past, we've seen this decision be announced fairly quickly after the incident, but this time Zen was aware much later and nothing was announced either publicly or privately up until this point. This could have been considered unprofessional from the admin team since he easily could have been making agreements and working his plans out for the season, but there was a heavy lack of communication. As of now, Zen was picked up by Vitality for this 4-man roster and is expected to step in once his ban ends in February 2023. Overall, we need more transparency for the situation, especially as they are unfortunately happening more and more often. Even as I'm making this video, yet another upcoming player, Nwippo from the Middle East, was caught in this scenario and will be facing a year-long ban. For an unexpected player rivalry that many of you felt I left out of my disrespectful moments video is of course the Lethamyr versus First Killer Salt Mine situation. Salt Mine was a 1v1 league play tournament that goes into a playoff bracket. In this instance, it was for the best North American talent in the game mode. And as the name would suggest, 1v1s are notorious for moments of toxicity and salt. And the Salt Mine NA was no exception. It was First Killer versus Lethamyr, with First being the strong favorite to win the whole event, considering he was 6-0 in league play, not dropping a single series so far. In game 1, we saw why this was, as First would take it 5-3. Lethamyr noticed this, and in game 2, he decided to just have some fun with the series and used a very non-standard car and topper, but First Killer wasn't having any of it. After a couple goals from First, he expressed that Lethamyr was only using this troll car to have an excuse when he loses. While Lethamyr said he would only be doing it for one game, First Killer didn't appreciate the supposed disrespect and told Lethamyr to take the game seriously. And serious did he take it.
All he has to do is put the ball into the ground and he's got the game won. There it is. Lethamyr gets his first win in the series. It's 2-1 now. So First Killer has a good chance in the series. He needs to just forget about this game, reset before game 5, because that is absolutely where we're headed at this rate. Can First Killer do it? I don't think he's got the time. Lethamyr, with a reverse sweep, has given First Killer his only and also his first loss in league play, and thus ends the streak of First Killer wins.
Chances are First Killer had gotten into his own head and tilted himself when he should have just been focusing on the game and not be, as Lethamyr said earlier, salty while winning. Crowds bring motivation and hype, and in Rocket League we have no lack of this and passion for the esport. But what happens when the crowd causes controversy? At the most recent World Championships surrounding the grand finals of G2 versus BDS, it was North America versus Europe and held in Texas. With G2 being from NA, we know who the crowd was supporting, but G2 just looked to be playing so much worse than BDS. They were losing to consistent fundamental gameplay that was locked down, and many fans found this playstyle honestly boring to watch. In comparison to others in the past, some said it was a much slower and underwhelming grand final, also for the fact it was after the intense Moist versus Furia match. So as G2 were clearly losing the series, a decent amount of the crowd decided to leave the venue as it was ending rather than stick around and see BDS be crowned with their medals and lift the trophy. This was significant since for players this is the ultimate goal, and for viewers the biggest end to the season. Some were upset and compared it to the London Major, where the crowd stayed even longer than after Moist were crowned winners, and made people think that this Texas crowd was being a disrespectful one for not celebrating the opposing team's win. RLCS analyst T-Bates tweeted that people need to recognize the cultural differences when it comes to crowds, and while in the UK they may cheer for all teams, the US may not be the same and show much more bias to their American teams, especially the casual fans. On top of this, it was good to point out that fans stayed for 10 hours to support the game while spending hundreds of dollars, while this was an event that ran 2 hours past schedule on a Sunday. Some people truly didn't understand how it was a controversial thing to leave the event once it was over, and compared to traditional sports, this would be nothing out of the ordinary. In the past year, Rocket League Esports have allowed more and more regions to compete in the RLCS, but there are still many countries that aren't allowed to compete at all. It's taken a long time to grow these emerging regions with ambassadors, if you will, to help. Johnny Boy for the Middle East and 180 for Asia Pacific are both great examples. There is a long list of countries that are ineligible to compete, and the community has wondered why this is for some. There is a lot that goes on in the back end, like China with having their own version of the game, possibly due to strict laws that prevent people from communicating with other countries through media, and parts of Europe unable due to US sanctions. It is a controversial topic because people from some of these places truly believe they should be allowed to compete. It's also 100% something that is enforced, with Itachi from Carmine Corp getting his team disqualified from the RLCS years ago since he played matches from his home country of Morocco. So that's definitely a less talked about controversy, on top of balancing the format to give deserving regions that have proven themselves more spots at Worlds. Let me know if you have any idea as to why so many of these countries are still not allowed to compete in the RLCS, especially if you're from these places. If you think I missed anything on this list, be sure to check out my 10 most disrespectful moments of Rocket League history, and it might just be on there. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.